Ivy and Gecko acknowledges the traditional owners of country throughout Australia, and we pay our respects to elders past, present and future. Welcome to Hearts and Minds. Our podcast episodes feature conversations with highly accomplished mining executives and board directors. We'll explore critical themes relating to leadership impact, staff engagement and culture development. So tune in, enjoy the conversations and prepare to be inspired. I'm Alana Bray-White, the Managing Director of Ivy and Gecko, and this is our podcast, Hearts and Minds.
Well, I think the purpose is to marshal the resources that you have available to you, and then to be able to motivate, inspire, guide that group of people, say, to deliver common outcomes. So, what you're aiming to do. So it's a bit of an inexact science in a way. There's a couple of ways of looking at it. You either have the authority of knowledge or you have the authority of position. And I think what you need to do is to use both from time to time in appropriate amounts and appropriate times to get the very best out of the people that you have around you.
Our guest today is Jeff Quartermaine. Jeff brings over 30 years of experience in senior corporate, financial and strategic roles with ASX listed and TSX listed resources companies, leading operations not only here in Australia, but also across the Asia Pacific, South America and West Africa. Jeff became Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer of dual-listed Perseus Mining in 2013, after serving as the company's Chief Financial Officer for 3 years. Since stepping into the leadership role, he's overseen production of more than 4 million ounces of gold from 3 operating mines and driven a growth strategy that's transforming Perseus into a multi-mine, multi-jurisdiction gold producer. With a 5-year outlook exceeding 500,000 ounces annually from 4 operations, Perseus is now recognised as Australia's largest and most successful gold company in Africa. We hope you enjoy this conversation with Jeff.
Jeff Quartermaine, welcome to Hearts and Minds.
Thank you for having me.
So good to see you. Thanks for accepting the invitation. What a story, Perseus. I followed your company's progress in recent years, and you must feel a great sense of achievement and satisfaction with how you've built the company and where it is today.
Well, I think it's a collective sense of achievement. It's not me on my own. It's me as part of a team, a leader of the team. But nevertheless, it's a shared situation.
And look, you're no stranger to this type of podcast. I know that you're in hot demand by analysts and investors to try to better understand where you're taking the business. Maybe if we just remind our audience, Perseus currently has 3 operating gold mines in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, with a couple of projects under development in Tanzania and Sudan. So you're not, strictly speaking, an exclusively West African business anymore. You're sort of pan-African to some extent. And with a strong balance sheet and reliable cash flows from your existing operations, I guess you're well positioned to seriously look at additional acquisitions as opportunities arise.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, we're well positioned for growth, but we're also, as importantly, well positioned to return capital to our shareholders. Yeah. And that's a balancing act to be able to continue the growth of the business, but at the same time reward those people that have supported you along the way.
I was also interested to note, Jeff, that you've fairly recently put out a 5-year production forecast. I don't think that's an obligatory requirement of the ASX, but clearly you're telling the marketplace that you have a very planned and long-term prospect with your operations.
Well, that was the major message, I must say. I mean, we've noted that our shares trade at a discount to both our Australian peers and globally, yeah. And we've reflected on this and identified 2 causes. One being that the so-called African discount, which is a subject in itself, but the other factor is that I think there was a belief that Perseus had a lot of good years and was soon about to go into decline, which is anything but the truth. So we thought what we would do is put into the market a base case of what we're going to deliver over the next 5 years. I actually think we'll deliver significantly more, but nevertheless, we have a habit in or a saying in our businesses that we do what we say we're going to do. And I think that on that 5-year plan, shareholders can be pretty certain that that's what we're going to do. And probably some more.
Fair to say, Jeff, Perseus is Australia's most successful company operating in Africa. That being the case, I'm very keen for you to share some of the insights that you've gained along the way, not so much from a financial or investment or technical perspective, because those aren't my areas of expertise. I'm a human resources professional, so I'm very keen to better understand your approach to leadership, how you become more effective as a leader over time, and the impact that has had on both staff and the wider stakeholder engagement and culture development. So keen for you to share some of the experiences in those areas.
I've been saying for quite some time there are several pillars of the business. One is the physical assets, one is the financial assets, one is your market, but then it's your human resources, your human assets, and your social license to operate. Yeah. And it's those last two things that I think you're referring to there. And I say, quite definitely that all five of those things need to be present to be successful. And if any of them, and if your human piece, social license piece is not operating, the rest of it's irrelevant.
And I think it's often underestimated, the human dimension of the mining business life cycle. I mean, people, after all, are the great enabler of progress and achievement.
100% correct. Absolutely correct. And I've been having those conversations. It's funny you should say that, because I've been having that exact conversation in the last couple of days. You need people. If you don't have people, nothing happens.
Yeah, indeed. Jeff, before we get into those topics, I'm sure our audience is curious to know more about you in terms of your early background years. What can you tell us?
Oh, well, I guess I grew up in far north Queensland. My father was a country bank manager. We moved around from place to place up in the far north, and I would say we had a lovely old lifestyle up there doing just that. Yeah. At about the age of 13, I was abruptly removed from this idyllic existence and went to boarding school in Brisbane, which was something of a cultural shock. Yeah. For me, but that was almost the start of the journey, really, in terms of understanding about what opportunities existed and what life was about, and things went on from there.
Did you enjoy school?
I love school, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting thing because for me, I have two sisters, and so when I went to boarding school, I had 1,000 brothers, and it was just fantastic. And I spent all my time playing sport and doing homework when I had to, and things like that.
So a rugby league sort of was the main sport, I presume?
No, it wasn't actually. No? I mean, I did play rugby league as a youngster, and thank you for reminding me about the state of origin last night. But as a youngster, I played league, and then when I went to school, I played rugby and cricket, in fact, actually. So they were the main things that I did.
What point in your career did you move to WA?
Oh, relatively recently, actually. In 2010, I came over here. Yeah. And I was approached by Reg Gillard, who's a fairly well-known West Australian person, and he said to me, we're doing this thing with this company in West Africa, and come over in 12 months' time we'll be taken over, and blah, blah, blah. Well, 15 years later, here I am. Yeah. And not only me, but most of my family as well.
So prior to joining Perseus, what industries did you work in?
I started off as an engineer, a civil engineer, and I worked in engineering for quite a number of years, and I went into management consulting, as it were, and then into the mining game, basically.
What was it that attracted you to the mining industry? Was it opportunistic in that you met with business associates or friends that convinced you that was the career path?
Well, if I'm perfectly honest, it was by accident. What actually did happen was I'd finished my MBA, so I had engineering MBA qualifications, and at that particular time, investment banking was just taking off like the thing to do. So I decided I wanted to be an investment banker and went for an interview with Elders Finance, which was the finance arm of the Elders IXL group. Anyway, the day when I arrived, they said to me, look, actually, we've just interviewed a guy who's got 10 years experience and he's fantastic, and we're not going to give you the job, but you're a very good candidate, and we've got this role in our mining group as an analyst. Would you be interested in doing it? And honestly, at that time, I didn't have any plans for the future other than the fact I was getting married shortly. And so I took the job, and the rest, as they say, is history. So that was my entry to mining.
You mentioned rugby. When you're not working hard and travelling, what do you do to recharge the batteries?
Well, that's changed over time, the answer to that question. But look, running an international business is almost a full-time occupation, in the sense if you're not out of the country, you're on the phone or whatever for a lot of time. And so with that in mind, I spend most of my spare time with my family, basically. I've been blessed, well, my wife and I have been blessed with a couple of grandchildren recently, so that's a new thing for us. And, we tried to make the best of the time we have available.
Jeff, you've held leadership roles at both the board level and the executive level. What is the purpose of leadership from your point of view, and what are the qualities that distinguish a very good leader from an ordinary leader?
Well, I think the purpose is to marshal the resources that you have available to you, and then to be able to motivate, inspire, guide that group of people, say, to deliver common outcomes. So, what you're aiming to do. So it's a bit of an inexact science in a way. There's a couple of ways of looking at it. You either have the authority of knowledge or you have the authority of position. And I think what you need to do is to use both from time to time in appropriate amounts and appropriate times to get the very best out of the people that you have around you.
Given the jurisdictions in which your company operates, largely West Africa, is there? Do you need to adapt your leadership approach depending on where you are and who you're dealing with? Yeah,
very much so. I mean, it's definitely not a one-size-fits-all proposition. I mean, culturally, the country, even though the countries might abut each other, one may have had for instance, Côte d'Ivoire has had a French colonial background, whereas Ghana is British, and you couldn't find two more different places, and that cultural overlay is very relevant in the way people think and the way that you need to respond to those circumstances.
There is a perception and perhaps a misconception that many people have. These are high-risk jurisdictions to operate in. But you look at the way you've fairly rapidly built your business over recent years, and that might suggest that it's not as complex and not as challenging as some people might think.
Well, that's absolutely the case. I mean, when you say high risk in what respect? I mean, are we talking physical, or are we talking financial, or geopolitically? I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to the business, and certainly some of those things are accentuated from time to time. But look, I think it's chronically overdone. I was looking at one of the newspapers the other day, yesterday I think it was, and saw some of the goings on in America, where someone pulls out an automatic weapon at a party and all the rest of it. I mean, those sort of things, that's pretty risky too, okay? So I think that you've got to keep things in perspective. From a safety point of view, I don't believe it's an issue at all. It's never been an issue for me in 15 years. From a fiscal issue, yes, there are certain things that occur from time to time that you need to manage very carefully. And there's a lot of things that do happen that are outside your control. But the same can be said of operating in Australia or North America or anywhere else. And I've often said to people, well, look, it's like this. You can either run a business very well or very poorly in Australia, just as you can run a business very well or very poorly in Africa. What do you want to do? Well, we want to run the business well, and that's what we set about doing.
Jeff, in the research that my firm has conducted from time to time, focused on the mid-tier miners, the concept of empowerment is often discussed amongst executive leaders. Generally speaking, people appreciate the opportunity to take on responsibility and autonomy for their work. They want to be empowered, and that usually fuels their engagement level and their satisfaction level. Again, I'm curious, given the jurisdictions in which you operate, do people in Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, enjoy the empowerment process, or is a command and control culture more appropriate?
I believe they do very definitely enjoy the empowerment thing. In Ghana, for instance, there is very definitely a hierarchical structure. A traditional leadership structure is very hierarchical with the chief, etc., etc. And I think that desire to be a part of that is very much embedded in the thinking. And so for us to empower them, to give them out their trust and to provide them with the wherewithal to exercise their judgment within limits, I think is very much appreciated. And it is an interesting question because, you see, we have this mine, Edikan mine. When we first started Edikan, I believed that what we would have success if our general managers had prior experience in Ghana. And so we had a succession of expatriate general managers. Now, and all of them, when they came in, had worked in Ghana about 10 years beforehand and hadn't appreciated the cultural change in that period of time. And I can say that under that leadership, we really did struggle to relate to our people and to achieve the best. I went to the board at one stage and told them that I wanted to appoint a Ghanaian chap as the general manager, and they, do you realise what you're doing, sort of thing. And we sat and we talked about it, and we decided that this is what we would do, and we would back the people involved and, you know, give them a full support, and the rest, as they say, is history. We've got a terrific group of people at Edicat, and you certainly contributed to that not so long ago with the appointment of one of those leaders. But, you know, I think that leadership team that we have in Ghana is as good as I have seen, actually, in terms of being able to achieve the outcomes and what have you.
You mentioned a change in the culture across that 10-year gap. In what ways has the culture changed?
Oh, well, I think this is a very general statement. I think in a lot of countries, people are becoming more assertive in terms of wanting to have a bigger say in the distribution of benefits, et cetera, et cetera. You know, some people would maybe call it resource nationalism in a way, but they're sort of saying, hang on a minute, this is actually belongs to us and we should get some benefit of. It's a similar sort of comment that I can recall being made in Queensland, 40 years ago when I was working at Dalrymple Bay Coal Terminal and seeing tons and tons of Queensland coal going over the conveyor to ships, you know, taking it overseas. Yeah. And we were thinking, gee, you know, we don't get much benefit from all of this. And this is exactly what people in Africa think today. They're saying we should get a bigger cut of the pie. And it's particularly pressing because the percentage of population that is very young is growing very rapidly. And so the governments are struggling to educate, house, you know, give people work, etc., and they need to fund it somehow or other. So they're saying, well, hang on, we need a bigger share of the action here.
And the reverse is happening in Australia, isn't it? I mean, we're an ageing population.
Yes, it is quite, and this is the thing, is that, you know, we can make a comment about one place or the other. We should never assume that all, you know, one size fits all.
It seems to me that people typically rise to leadership by being good talkers. They can tell a good story and they're influential, they're convincing. But to stay in leadership and to become a great leader, I think you need to develop skills in listening. I've known you for several years. You can certainly tell a good story, but also it seems to me you're a very good listener. What advice would you give up-and-coming managers and leaders about being more effective in the listening side of communication?
Well, I'd just say shut up and listen. No, quite seriously, I mean, honestly, I think that's a very interesting observation, and it's so true. Yeah. I mean, you know, I think that is an area that a lot of people, and myself from time to time, you know, fail at, or not fail at, but could do better, is to not just hear, but to really listen. And particularly when you're in a cross-cultural situation, you need to recognise that people are talking to you in not their first language, but it might be their second or their third, and that you really need to understand exactly what it is that they're saying, and you also need to make sure that they understand exactly what you're saying as well.
I guess there'd be a lot of nuances in the conversation, wouldn't there?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, and it goes both ways. So it's terribly important to be face to face, I think. Because body language and things like that is also a part of the communication. But, you know, to really work hard at making sure that there's no misunderstanding, you know, between the pair of you, it's really, really important.
Asking questions is so important, isn't it, to clarify the intent and the concept behind what someone's trying to say to you. I remember I'm rereading a book by Jim Collins. I think it is it's Stephen Covey. In fact, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of those 7 habits is seek first to understand and then to be understood. So it just reinforces the importance of learning how to listen well and how to ask questions to really deeply understand the point of view of someone else. And until you can get to that stage, it's very difficult to convey your message to somebody.
Well, that's absolutely right. And you know, I quite regularly say that the most important thing that I know is that I don't know. And then that's saying I will need to sit and listen to you to figure out what is actually going on. And I think if I can sort of relate that to our company as a way, one of the things that differentiates us, say, from some of the other companies that operate, particularly from other countries, is that they will turn up into some of these countries in Africa and say, this is the way we're going to roll, folks. our way or the highway. And what we try not to do that. We say this is the way we would like to go, but how does this work? And see if there's common ground. It may be that we need to adapt our model to suit local circumstances. Now, you obviously need to have a very, very strong set of core values and be absolutely adamant that you're not going to breach those things, because once you start doing that, then you're in no man's land. But without breaching your core values, you can often modify your business model to generate more benefits. So I'll give you an example, if I may, just very briefly. I mean, some of the governments in Africa have said, well, we want you to sell 20% of your gold to us. Now, when you say that to somebody in Australia, they go, oh my God, are these guys stealing your gold, or are they going to pay you a lousy price for it or something like that? So there's shock and horror. But what we've actually done is we thought about, that was my first reaction as well, I might add, but we sat down, we had a look at it and we said, no, okay, well, look, if you want to buy it, you can buy it, but you're going to buy it at the advertised price. And then, yes, you want to pay for it in local currency, not a problem. You put it in our bank account in the country and we'll use that to pay local bills. And by doing that at published rates, there's no ambiguity. We're not getting caught in the local banking system, and it works. It works for the country because they build up their foreign reserves. It works for us because we have less ambiguity. So a direct, absolute win-win that came about from, we can actually work with that.
Transparency is very important, and it fosters a building of trust, doesn't it? And I remember Charlie Munger, the long-time lieutenant of Warren Buffett from Berkshire Hathaway. Charlie Munger was 100 when he died last year. And in his very last interview, I just happened to be at the right place at the right time watching it on TV. He was asked the question, over your 80-year career in business, what is the most important thing you've learned? And his response was that trust is the most powerful economic force on earth. And that drilled it home to me how critically important it is to establish a trust-based relationship with your staff, with your customers, with your suppliers, with everybody. It really is the currency of progress.
And now we take a short break to acknowledge our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by Halo Civil Engineering. Halo is a multidiscipline civil contractor that specialises in the delivery of complex civil projects across defence, infrastructure, energy and resources. A West Australian company committed to delivering dynamic solutions with a focus on zero harm, while having a positive impact on their industry, clients and the people they serve. For more information, search for Halo Civil Engineering on socials or visit halocivil.com.
Is your business ready to amplify its voice? At Podwave Studios, we offer professional video podcast production services that help you connect with clients, build your brand and grow your audience. From corporate messaging to thought leadership, we've got you covered. Book your session at podwavestudios.au today.
As the only executive search and leadership consulting firm to be admitted membership of the Minerals Council of Australia, Ivy & Gecko is uniquely resourced to advocate for the interests of our exploration, project development and mining clients.
Jeff, as CEO, tell me how you manage your dynamic, the personality dynamic with your executive leadership team. Presumably you've got a group of intelligent, motivated people, possibly opinionated. How do you encourage the best contribution of each individual to progress the whole?
Yeah, that's a very, very, very pertinent question, isn't it? And I draw on my actual, experience playing sport and coaching actually to do that, because it's the parallels are enormous, where you've got very highly talented people. Individually, they can do their business, but if you don't have trust, the word trust that you just used a moment ago, if you don't have trust between people, if you don't have collaboration, you don't have respect, you're going to be in fairly deep water. And if you put it into a football rugby thing, and you're defending in a back line, you need to trust that the man beside you is going to do his job and is capable of doing it, and that it'll work out well. And if you need help, you also need to trust that he's going to come and support you and do it in a way that is beneficial. And that's exactly the way it works in our business. I try to build that same level of trust, cooperation, openness recognising that I do want to, we've got really high performing people, and you are going to have a little bit of competitive tension from time to time, and I think that's not a bad thing actually. To little bit of frisson doesn't go astray, provided it doesn't get out of hand. But they're the sort of things that we work at doing, and overlaying all of that is communication between the group of us. And our team sit down every morning at 9 o'clock, and we have a bit of a natter about what's coming up for the day and what's come in overnight, and that works to build up that relationship and trust and cooperation.
What's your opinion in terms of remote working? If we look at your corporate office here in Perth, are you a fan of remote working, or would you rather have people in the office most of the time?
Look, I'm not a fan of it personally, but I do understand there are some roles where it works better than others. It just depends on what people are doing, really.
Yeah, I think it depends on the nature of the business and the size of the business. And certainly with new employees coming into the organisation, you need to have that personal contact.
Yeah, look, there's an awful lot to be said for the informal communication, I think. Yeah. And you do miss that when people are working from home. But having said that, some of the roles do require a higher level of concentration and can be done in isolation. But generally speaking, I think that I would prefer not to go that way.
Yeah. Jeff, most of my guests on this program lament at the relatively low numbers of mining professionals being produced each year out of the various tertiary institutions, and indeed at the skilled labour level, tradespeople. Do you have a point of view in terms of how we can improve the system so that we get the talent required to operate these essential mines of the future?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's fairly simple, really. It's about education, and that is a very difficult thing to do because, I think in probably very, very unpopular for saying this, but I think in the formal education system, there's a bias against mining. People are told that, miners destroy the environment and all the rest of the business, and I think that it's incumbent on us to be able to present an alternative situation, to put the real facts on the table and show people that, in fact, that isn't the case at all. And I can very definitely say that because when I look at what our business contributes to the communities where we work, both in an environmental and in a social sense, I mean, I'm extremely privileged to have the opportunity to do what we do. And I think that if people saw what we contribute, there'd be very little opposition to what we're doing.
And your company certainly has a very strong social licence, it seems to me. I mean, you go well beyond the minimum requirements in terms of communicating to your stakeholders, the local communities in the jurisdictions where you operate, to lay down what you're doing in terms of investment into the facilities of that community. And I think that's so important.
Well, yeah, it is. Look, I don't want to sort of try and present myself as a saint here. There's a bit of self-interest involved because, as someone pointed out to me, at the end of the day, if a person goes home from work to his village and the company is despised by the village for not treating them well, he'll be, feeling very uncomfortable with his family and colleagues. And when he comes back to work the next day, he's not going to be feeling good about doing that, and that's going to affect his productivity. The reverse applies. If the person goes home and he's respected in his community because the company has contributed to the community and he's part of that, he's going to be elevated in this status, he's going to come back to work and be happy, and it's a positive cycle. So, we want to help people through the social piece, but we do also get significant benefit from doing a good job there.
If we ask candidates or staff here in Australia what they look for in their ideal position or work environment, they'll say they want to feel as though their talents are valued, they want a purpose, they want to feel safe. They also say that most people say that they want a career path. I'm curious again with the jurisdictions where you operate, is there a cultural difference between Australians and, let's say, Ghanaians in terms of their ambition to advance their career?
Absolutely. Look, what you just said is exactly what applies in our places, both in Côte d'Ivoire and in Ghana. And it's like, by providing a safe environment where people are respected, treated well, et cetera, that's an intangible benefit that's enormously important and valued by people, and progression through education. And we're confronted with this very, very regularly because, particularly say in Côte d'Ivoire where the industry is just starting really, and so our people who we've trained are frequently fielding offers from other companies. Now, I go in and talk to people and I say to them, and I do make a habit of talking to everybody on the site when I go, and I say to them, look, you are going to receive offers, and I can tell you now that what they're going to offer you is more than what we're going to pay you. We pay you a fair wage. But before you accept it, I want you to think about those other things. The fact that you enjoy coming to work every day, and why you enjoy it, because you're treated well, you're treated respectfully, we create a safe environment, we insist that you go home safely every day, and we give you opportunity to grow as a person. Now, just decide whether those few dollars is going to compensate for loss of that. And I can tell you that what happens on a very regular basis is that people accept the job with another company for money, and within months are ringing up asking for their job back, because we do work hard at that side of things, and it's hugely important.
Is there an ideal end state, a culture for a mining business? And given the places you operate, can subcultures coexist, or does there need to be a uniform culture?
Well, look, it's a very dynamic situation. I think that provided the core values are adhered to at all times, then I think the actual nuance around it is not so important. I mean, we as a company try to present a single thing, through badging and, various things like that, through the training programs, et cetera. But, as I say, core values, number one. And the thing that has absolutely pleased me at all of these sites is how passionately people have adopted the concept of core values and what it means to them. And they're the ones that repeat it back to me when I go there.
Values are the glue that build culture, I think. And I so agree with you that having those foundational values in place and having leaders at the various levels model the behaviour that they wish to be replicated by the rest of the team is so important.
Totally.
It's like parenting, it's like coaching. Modelling behaviour is what leadership is largely about, I think.
Walking the talk, as they say. Yeah,
indeed.
For sure.
Yeah. We often hear about a company's culture, Jeff, after a crisis. There's been a number of them in fairly recent times in Australia. There may have been a moral or a regulatory breach that is described at the time as a one-off, but then we identify a systemic failure. How best can a CEO build a resilient and sustainable culture?
Well, I think through example, as we just said, walking the talk. In fact, living the values and reminding people that that's actually what they need to do. Now, that's not going to eliminate the possibility that people will vary from the system, and they will from time to time, I dare say. But I think the majority of people respond positively to leadership. They respond positively to leading by example. And, that's what we try to do. I mean, I wouldn't say that we're perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know that we work very hard at trying to get people to align themselves to what we do.
More broadly speaking, what are some of the challenges facing explorers and project developers and miners in Africa?
Oh, well, technically speaking, it's relatively easy, straightforward. It's the same as anywhere. I think, for a company like ours, managing the geopolitics, or coping with I won't say managing geopolitics, because you don't manage them, you respond to them. I think managing and responding to culture is terribly important. And, working with your people, I think, if you look at how my time is allocated, compared to, say, an Australian CEO, I would spend an disproportionate amount of time on managing geopolitics, managing our position within that framework, managing our position within the communities, and working with our people. That's terribly, terribly important.
What about things like environmental approval processes and,
well, look, environmental, to me, that's a given. It's an interesting one. It's a little bit like safety. I don't personally dwell a lot on safety because I take that as a given. That's a non-negotiable. And the same thing with environmental management. That is a non-negotiable. You must do those sorts of things.
But in terms of the government or the regulatory bodies, is there a contrast between West Africa and Australia in terms?
Well, they're probably quicker in West Africa, truth be known, than Australia. I mean, I think there's less bureaucracy in many respects, although the difference in the bureaucracy in Africa to here is that the quality or the education standards is not as high or as consistent, perhaps as it is in Australia. And so when you're dealing with the upper echelons, you know things will work pretty well. It's when approvals go down the line that delays get incurred because people. It's sort of an interesting thing. I think a lot of people in those situations value their job enormously because it gives them security and it gives their family security. And they're absolutely terrified of making a mistake because they will lose their job. And so the best way not to make a mistake is not to do anything. And that introduces delays into the process. And that can be enormously frustrating at times. In fact, we're dealing with some of those issues as we speak. And but, you know, the thing is, this is the thing about coping with it and trying to find a way to get your way through the system, not by paying bribes or anything like that, but trying to find out what it is that they need in order to be able to make the decisions that are required and how can we help you to get to that position.
Are Ghanaians well educated in terms of, you know, the proportion of people that go through the education system to the tertiary level? Yeah, no,
the tertiary education, I mean, when I'm talking about education, it's not just, you know, going to school and getting a degree, it's knowing what you're doing and understanding. And that I think that, you know, in the upper levels of the organisations, particularly the bureaucracy, there's excellent people. But it's just when you get down the line a bit, it changes a little.
Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence. It seems that it's pretty much a mainstream application in the mining industry, particularly with the bigger companies. To what extent is Perseus investing in artificial intelligence applications across its various businesses?
Well, I can't say that we are. I don't know whether we are or not. I suspect people are using it in their own way, but I don't think we're really, you know, pursuing that. And I guess it depends what you talk about by artificial intelligence. I mean, you know, one thing we do is we work very hard at business improvement, and that takes many forms, and it may be technological or maybe, you know, social or whatever the case happens to be. I mean, you know, I think it is interesting because when you talk to people about these sort of things, I mean, people immediately start thinking about electric trucks or, you know, or automated systems or whatever, but there's an awful lot more than that to it. So yes, we probably do it actually, but we don't, you know, use it as a headline.
Do you have a question for me, Jeff? Without any notice, I've been in the recruitment industry, mainly focused on mining for most of my career. Does anything occur to you that you're curious to know?
Yes, and if I could just put it like this. So one of the things that, you know, I've had cause to reflect on in recent times is, you know, what are the things that you've done okay and what are the things that you haven't done so well in and what would you have done differently? So I've reflected on that. And when I've thought about it, I think one of the areas that if I had my time again, I'd like to improve is on people selection, which is right into your area. And I think that I was actually thinking about this very deeply in the last couple of days, and I think if I look back, you know, if I looked at the mistakes that I've made over time, probably where I've disappointed myself is around people selection. Yeah. And I think about why did I do that, and why did I make that choice? And what I've reflected on is quite often it's because I ignored my instincts. Yeah. I've been allowed myself to be persuaded by perhaps people like yourself or others as to the suitability. What do you think about you know, selection of people? What's really important?
It's a really interesting question, and I'm often asked it. I think just going back to your point about instinct or intuition, it is so important, and I think the older you get, the more experienced you become, the more important your intuition is, and the more accurate it is. My rule of thumb, generally speaking, Jeff, when it comes to selecting people for jobs is to long list on competencies, short list on evidence of relevant achievements, and hire on values. Values that you're confident are well aligned to the corporate values of the organisation and the culture of the place. Also, I think it best to spread the responsibility of assessing a candidate across your ELT, or if it was a case of an MD or a CEO, across the board. In other words, get a number of people to get exposure to that candidate and listen to their opinions and their assessment. I do a lot of work with Evolution Mining, and typically at the general manager level, they would have 5 interviews, which some may argue is over the top and quite exhausting for both the client and the candidate involved. But they go to great lengths to receive feedback from a variety of people. They also get a candidate at that level to undertake a 6-hour online assessment centre exercise. It is gruelling. But the reward is, I believe, for that company, that they have a very, very low turnover rate. They are very good at selecting the right people. Not just in terms of technical and leadership competency, but in terms of value alignment. The other thing I always do, and it's becoming somewhat out of fashion these days, is reference checking. And I don't necessarily turn to the back of a CV and where typically a candidate will write 2 or 3 referees that they've set up to give very generous responses. I talk to the people that I believe are important to talk to, and they may or may not be on the referee list. I do ask the candidate for permission to talk to those people, but those people may not necessarily be ex-bosses. They may be clients. They may be major supplier contacts. People who would have an appreciation of the candidate from different perspectives, different angles, and for different reasons. So the more relevant information you can collect, obviously, the more you reduce the risk of making a mistake. But look, recruitment is an art and a science, and you can never eliminate the risk when it comes to people. You can just try and mitigate it.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting subject, and what you're saying there. I mean, there's a couple of follow-on questions, if I may. I mean,
yeah.
I know that a lot of people do look at try to use psychometric testing and things of that nature, and I mean, I think as a data point that's interesting. But, what sort of weighting would you put on the results of a psychometric test versus personal knowledge of the person versus somebody else's opinion?
Look, I'm an organisational psychologist by background and training and degree. I have to say, with all frankness, that I rely less on the profiles and the results of psychometric testing today than I might have done 20, 30 years ago when I was a newbie in the industry. And again, I think it comes back to what we spoke about a few minutes ago. With experience and with confidence and with maturity, your intuition becomes more accurate and more effective. That's not to say I ignore psychological test results. We often do them. But I think you just need to be very holistic in the way that you assess somebody. And look, if there's something at the back of your head or your gut says, I'm just not quite comfortable with this person, you need to continue digging.
Yeah, well, actually, what you've said aligns 100% with my thinking, actually, is that I think, as I say, those results are data points, but I put a whole lot more value on the things that I can see and hear and touch. What about references? You mentioned about... Oh, sorry, I'm asking all the questions.
Go for it.
Turn this around here. No, the issue of referees is one that is a perplexing thing. We've had situations where, have done precisely as you say. A person comes out, particular setting, gone and asked a lot of people, but people who have asked for opinions have got a propensity to not actually tell you the full truth. They tell you maybe part of the truth or whatever. I guess what you're saying is by coming at it from a lot of sources and triangulating, you just might pierce the veil, as it were.
That's right. And the sort of questions you ask a referee are not just, would you rehire the person? What are his strengths? What are his weaknesses? You might ask those questions. But you also ask the question, how should this person's next manager approach this person to get the best out of him or her? That reveals a lot to you. You're not saying, look, is he good or is he bad? You're saying, how do you manage this individual to encourage his talents to come to the fore and to make the very best and most valuable contribution he can do. The other thing I like to do, Jeff, a bit old-fashioned perhaps, is when I'm talking with the preferred shortlisted candidate, get him out of the interview room, get him into a cafe or a restaurant, have a meal, have a coffee, observe how that person interacts with people around them, including the waiter or the waitress. Does that candidate look the person in the eye and say, thank you, Rebecca, as she puts the coffee on the table? Those courtesies, for me at least, are important signals of how that person might behave in social interactions in the future. You know, I put some weighting on those things. So get the person out of the more formalised, somewhat artificial environment of an interview situation and into the real world and watch them. So if you do that, you talk to referees, you consider the results of psychometric appraisals, you ask the right competency-based questions in the first place. You know, you're getting information from all sorts of angles.
Well, I've listened to you and I've learned a fair bit. So how's that?
There you go. Now, let's do some rapid-fire questions. Jeff, what are you most optimistic about?
Well, I guess at the moment the sun getting up tomorrow is a good one.
And what's a big risk that we're not paying enough attention to, do you think?
Well, there's a lot of them, isn't there? I mean, I'm actually a little bit pessimistic about the way the world's panning out right now.
It's good for the gold price, though.
Yes, it's a dreadful thing, though, to have to death ride the world to make a dollar.
Yeah, there's a lot to be concerned about, isn't there? There sure is, and look, I've stopped listening to the news 3 or 4 times a day on the radio or TV. I listen to it once a day and just get on with life and manage the things that I think I can control. When you think about people who've shown great leadership, whether it be in business or sport, politics, art, who comes to mind? Why do you admire them?
That's a funny question, actually. I tend to probably look to sports people rather than business people and the like, because I think sports, you know, is a real test of character in many respects. I mean, it's a test of physical capability, but it's also a serious test of character. Yeah. So, you know, there's a few people who, in that field, who are certainly...
Sport is a very uplifting thing, isn't it? And I don't often look at a hard print newspaper these days, but when I do pick one up, I immediately go to the back page, looking for some inspiration and hope and achievement. What's a non-fiction book that you found particularly valuable to help you in developing your leadership or business skills?
Well, once again, look, you know, it's a funny thing. I don't make a habit of... Well, I've attempted to read quite a number of business books. I have to say I've never read any of them cover to cover. You know, once again, coming back to the sports thing, I had reason to meet Wayne Bennett in his younger years, and I've read several of his books, and I really like the way, you know, he talks about the way he, in his coaching career, has managed his teams of people and dealt with things. And I have to say, it is interesting to consider that, because I did come across him as a university student and used to play some sport in the country, and he was finishing his professional career, and he came down as a guest coach on this one occasion, and he had a particular way of motivating himself, which he demanded apply to everybody in the room, and it didn't fit my way of doing things, because I tended to go about things in a different way. And I think he thought, you know, he certainly let me know that I wasn't doing the right thing. It was interesting to read his books later on about, after he'd had tremendous success as a coach, about how over time he'd changed his method of coaching and recognising that every person in the dressing shed was different. Yes. And every person in the dressing shed had their own way of motivating, etc., 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 which is exactly the same as in our business. We talked about the high-performance team. Every individual has their own motivators, their own pressure points, the things that are important to them. Yeah. And I think that recognising that is terribly important. And so that's a bit of a lesson that I took out of reading Wayne's books.
It's an interesting example. I've not read I've not read a biography of Wayne, but I've heard other people talk about him, and it seems that his approach is not to build a football player, but it's to help develop the moral, holistic character of a young man. In that respect, he's a psychologist, he's a counsellor. He knows that the history of a person, where they came from, what their personal challenges are very important to how they can, adapt and develop into an elite athlete. And gee, isn't he a survivor? He's been in the game for so long.
Yes, well, he's had success, so...
Yeah. What's the best career or business advice you've been given?
Yeah, well, I've been given a bit of advice along the way, let me assure you. But, look, I think, it really does vary. I did actually have cause to chat to one of the leaders of a role I was in about 40 years ago, just the other day, and I said to him, you'd be very surprised to know that I frequently quote you. The things that you told me as a young whippersnapper have really been imprinted on me. But some of those things, like, the long term is the sum of the short terms. If you don't deal with today, there won't be tomorrow, is a pretty important one. Yeah. But I think, some of the other things around respecting people and, also acting with integrity and believing in, what you need to know yourself and act on your instincts and be true to yourself.
So true. I remember I had a boss for many years who recently passed away, and I always remember him saying to me, David, you can't control the weather, but you can adjust your sail to catch the breeze. So in other words, control what you can control. Get up each day, assess the circumstances that you're faced with, choose your response, and deal with it as best you can. Is there a daily habit or a routine that you've got, Jeff, that you think might be valuable to other people?
I mean, everybody's different, as we say, but, I do try to take a small amount of time just to consider what's coming up during the day and try and organise my head a bit. I mean, until fairly recently I used to ride quite a lot, and being out on a bike in the morning was the best place for doing that. No telephones, no emails, and just sort of thinking through what was coming up and how I was going to deal with various bits and pieces. Yeah,
it's a form of mindfulness, isn't it? Some people might call it meditation. I go for a walk each morning, most mornings at least, and just clear my head, listen to the birds singing in the trees, and just take some deep breaths and just pause and reflect on what's about to occur and prepare myself. Final question, Jeff. What advice would you give your 25-year-old self to help you build and lead a better quality life?
Well, the advice that I would give is don't ignore your health. And, that's a case of do what I say, don't do what I do. But I honestly do believe, healthy body, healthy mind is absolutely the case. And I know throughout my career, when I've had the opportunity to be able to have a decent exercise regime while I'm working, I've always felt a whole lot better, and I suspect perform better. I mean, with the travel that I do, it's kind of a bit hard to keep things going. But that is something. I think it's very easy as a young person to ignore that advice and to pass it on. And I look at my dad, who's 102, and
really,
he's he always exercised and kept himself active, and I think it's certainly put him in good place.
He lives in Queensland.
He does indeed. Yeah.
In his own place or in
his own house. Yeah.
Wow, that is amazing. Yeah. And how long ago did your mother pass away, Jeff?
15, 20 years ago. Yeah.
Wow, 102. The stories he could tell.
Indeed.
My mother's 95 and living in Sydney with my sister and her family, and it's. I just find it amazing how people can be so optimistic and positive in their older age when their faculties start to decline. It's just an inspiration.
It is an inspiration indeed.
Jeff, thank you so much for being our guest. You're always generous with your time, and congratulations on the great work you've done to date in building the Perseus business. And we look forward to hearing, positive news and progress about the projects that you've currently got under development and indeed acquisitions down the track. So thanks again for being our guest.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to Hearts and Minds. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave us a rating or share it with a friend. And don't forget to follow us and connect on social media for updates on all of our upcoming guests. I'm Alana Bray-White, and I look forward to you joining us for our next episode.